G'day and welcome to the Pursuit of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Rosie Burrows, and I'm on a journey to find my freedom so that I can help you do exactly the same. Join me each week as I share the stories of everyday people who have found their own paths to freedom. I'm not going to focus on job titles and accolades because I don't care about that stuff, and neither should you. I want to uncover what truly makes you tick. Who are you when you step away from society's expectations and follow your heart? I still haven't figured it out yet. Have you? Either way, buckle up because it's going to be one hell of a ride. Welcome back to another episode. Joining me today is Lydia Lowery Busler. Lydia, thank you so much for joining me this morning, or it's probably evening where you are, is it?
It's going on toward evening. It's late afternoon, and I am very excited to be able to join you from all the way across the world.
Yeah, thank you. I love it.
It's what we can do.
It really is. It's great being able to talk with people all around the world, which I think, that wasn't always possible, and it's great. I feel privileged to be able to have you here because you're a really interesting and exciting person, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot of value today. And where I like to start in lots of these episodes is with your story. I'm really interested to just hear from your point of view. What is your story? If we go way back to Lydia as a little child, what brought you joy? What were some of your fears, and what's been your journey?
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's I almost feel like I've gone through different lifetimes, I'm probably not alone in that, feeling that way. But I came into this world and apparently I sang before I talked.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah.
So, yeah. And I had a relationship just with my mother for a long time, and that was, I think, a really good time of my life. And I just had a lot of baking and flowers, and then I went into a period of my life in which there was a lot of there was love, but there was also a lot of, it became kind of a perfectionistic creature because there was a lot expected of me. I was an only child. I learned a lot of compassion growing up because my growing up was something where we always took in little creatures that needed help and needed solace, were calling out because they had no mother, just needed aid, and so I really learned compassion. But somehow I got just swept into and I don't even really know how it started per se, but I got for about 10 years I was in a pattern of abuse from many people, and it was really quite serious. But it kind of created who I am, though, because I had this basis of compassion and forgiveness. I somehow, though I didn't know it when I was in the middle of all of this, I actually endured a lot of torture. I didn't realize at that time what all that was going to mean to me, but it created someone who has a kind of an alternative sleep schedule now, and it created in me, when it came down to finally saying something and saying, There were several times I think when I tried to say something, and I think a lot of people go through this, but tried to say stop, but we're so small, and it's all we know, and
Mm.
even going into being a teen, it's all we know.
Mm.
I stopped what was going on with several people, and I even though I took a long time away from them, I've learned how to forgive, and that's how I've come a long, long way. It's that forgiveness it's for us. It's not, you know, we are not going to, we're not going to heal if we
Yeah.
don't forgive. So, and the way that happens is that I found that I'm extremely intuitive, and I can feel the pain that comes from other people, and that
Mm.
they have that pain inside of them too, and that's all that they know. I'm very much a healer now, and I found that I had a lot of healing energy. Um,
Mm.
a lot of that came out as creative energy. So
Mm.
I'm a creative, and
Mm-hmm.
I went through music school and art school, and I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I had all this creative energy, and everybody said, "No, you have to go. You have to go do this other stuff." And I said, I
Yeah.
want to heal animals," but it ended up being the right thing.
Mm.
But then, so yeah, being young was for me a time of it was a lot of distraction, a lot of trying to get through my studies, and being not really told that I was doing well myself, but being told to other people how great a student I was, and how great a
Right.
musician I was, and I wouldn't be told myself unless I got a not so great grade, and then I'd be asked, what the heck was going on with that,
Right.
and
Right.
oh my goodness, what do you think was going on with that? It was hard for me to get any work done, and I usually got it done right before the class in the hallway, right
Mm.
before. And to this day, I push everything to the last minute, but
I
it
can
works.
relate to that. Yeah.
It works. I don't give myself a hard time about it, because I used to, but I've realized that everything that makes me me those were my ways of adapting and surviving, and they're not bad.
Mm.
They're strong,
Mm-hmm.
and they're perfectly valid ways of being, and they're wonderful.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing all that. And I want to touch on this theme of pain, because I know last time we spoke, we were talking about how we're often told, or we believe this narrative that we're broken and we can't get through our pain. I think a lot of us get stuck in that. And it sounds like
Mm.
you've managed to do a lot of healing. So, can you talk a bit more about getting to a space where you can be ready to heal?
That was one sort of lifetime, and I think I healed some from that, but I think all that compassion for me was for other people, and later I had to have the compassion for myself, and that was a big step. Where I learned that, and going actually through the through the work and through the pain was in a really bad car accident. And I had it was a freak accident. I don't really I remember before it and I remember after it, but I had amnesia during it. So I ended up in the hospital for 3 months. So
Wow.
during that time, um, I have kind of a soft spot in my in for hospitals in a strange way. I mean, right at the moment, our healthcare system is kind of failing here now. It's
Mm.
becoming more and more understaffed, and we don't have the care that we used to have because it's kind of falling apart. But back then, we did have better healthcare, and it definitely saved my life, and that care that I was getting, I really felt it. I really noticed what that was like while I was laying there. And granted, I was stuck there, but I didn't say, "Oh, poor me." I was stuck there. I had a lot of pain. I had some internists who came in, and I was having an allergic reaction, and I didn't know it. I didn't have any reason to know it. No one had a
Mm-hmm.
reason to know it. It was called a dystonic reaction, and it was to some medication that I was being given on a drip.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a huge surgery to take out my spleen, which had been pulverized, and half of my pancreas that had been squished. But this medication was causing me to sort of bend backwards and get very stiff and bend backwards on myself, and it was pulling against the surgery, and was
Mm.
making it very it was very, very painful.
Mm-hmm.
And what these internists would say was, just calm down. Calm down. And nobody's ever calmed down when they were told to just calm down, first
No.
of all.
Yeah.
Second of all, I couldn't do anything about it, and I couldn't tell them that because I couldn't talk, because it was
Right.
pulling at my mouth. It was dystonia, and if you know what dystonia is, people who have it happen to them, um, it causes involuntary muscle contractions in the part of their body that they're having it in. So this was causing this in my whole body as a
Mm.
reaction to the drug that they were giving me constantly, and it would have. It's a very deadly thing, because it eventually will take over all of your muscle contractions. Finally, a nurse came in and recognized what was happening and said, you know, "You bozos, she's having a dystonic reaction, and we have to get her off of this and get her on some Benadryl." The head of surgery got them off of the case and actually fired them from
Oh
it, and
wow. Yeah.
it was very, very serious. But that was huge. That was huge for me. Those two, even though I went through that situation, I don't stick with the horrible. I don't even really think
Right.
about the horrible. It's part of the story. But those two people, the doctor and the nurse, they were my champions.
Mm.
So going through that, I I really had a chance to work on myself and what had been my life before, and really work on the pain and what was going on as I went forth. Um, One thing I'm not mentioning, because it doesn't really have anything to do with going forward, is that I actually, in that car accident, at very first, after 24 hours, I actually died and came back to life. Like, it was that they saved me when they went in for the surgery. So it was that close. It
Wow.
doesn't really have a bearing on going through. It was just I did get this idea that I had to endure. It sounds kind of optimistic, like, oh, I was saved. But there's a flip side to that when there's all this stuff going on and you almost die and you don't. You just have to go through all this pain. You can just, say, why me? Why do I have
Mm.
to endure all this pain? Why can't you just let me die? And that's not where I was. I was like, I'm going through this and I'm going to the other side. Uh, there's a vision of myself healed. And that's what I had. But I had to go through the pain first, and all of the pain. So there's the mental anguish, and the mental anguish for me was like the mental anguish of other people too, because of my empathy. And then really just holding all of it for myself and saying, hey, there's you. You have to heal you. And then healing the physical pain. In those 3 months, I couldn't eat or drink. So because the pancreas takes care of all of that and it's too
Mm-hmm.
stimulating for it. It means that my digestion now is not great, but I take digestive enzymes. It's a thing though that once that all calms down, we can start to introduce food gradually. So that's what I did, and I came out. My knee was kind of squished in that accident too, but I didn't. But we were busy, fixing the rest of me,
Yeah.
and I, and I started to just live life again, and I biked and hiked and
Wow.
skied and did things, and then all of a sudden one day, like 5 years later, my knee gave out like completely. And I thought, okay, what's this? And it's that I had a ligament that was hanging on by a thread from that old accident.
Wow. Wow.
So I said, okay, that's going to be nothing. It's just going to let's just fix this old knee and it'll be
Mm-hmm.
fine. But apparently, it was kind of a strange injury. So the doctor that I had done his doctoral thesis on this, but the surgery had only been done like 50 times in
Wow.
at all, and it had
Wow.
been done like on the west coast of the United States, and I was on the east coast.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, I'll do this, and said, you don't have to. You could wear this big black brace and just keep, I said, no, I trust you. I'll do it.
Wow.
And I did
Yeah.
trust him. I trusted him. And he kept putting it off. He said, I've got more research and I want to make sure that we do the really good job on this.
Mm-hmm.
And we had an anesthesiologist that I trusted. And so finally got to the day that we were doing the surgery, and I was being put under, and at the last minute they changed the anesthesiologist. And I remember thinking, this guy is an idiot, which is,
Mm.
terrible. But when I woke up 11 hours later, it was a huge, long surgery.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 11
Um,
hours. Wow.
yeah. Well, they do this thing where they take, this was a posterior cruciate ligament,
Right.
in the back of the knee, and then they also did medial collateral and the lateral collateral going up the sides of the knee.
Wow.
Um, so what they do is they take out the front of a strip out of the front of the patella tendon, and they string it in back behind the anterior cruciate ligament, and they put it in as the posterior cruciate ligament. The tendon dies, and then it grows in new blood vessels and it becomes ligament. It's
Wow.
fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
but it takes a while.
Mm.
So when something like that happens, and the anesthesiologist's job is not only to take care of the anesthesia, but also to take care of the tourniquet, because you don't want
Hmm.
blood flowing in there all the time, but you
No.
can't leave a limb not having blood for all that
Right.
time. So they're supposed to take it off every 2 hours.
Right.
And um, when I came to, the nurse there said, "You don't. I've never seen a tourniquet left on that long." I thought, well, that's
Oh my
strange.
God. Yeah.
And I was just really sick because that was a long time, a lot
Hmm.
of anesthesia. And
Yeah.
my mom was there, and she was like, "Oh, that's weird." My leg was huge. It was like,
Mm.
um, it was huge. It was like as wide as the bed. It was huge. And
Mm.
it actually stayed like that for a couple of weeks if the swelling didn't
Wow.
go down. And um, when it did go down, my whole leg went down to bone. It was
Wow.
like it atrophied
Mm.
in 2 weeks. So that was really strange. And it was
Mm.
also outrageously painful, like
Mm.
more painful than the surgery 5 years before, more painful than anything. To make a really long story a little shorter, they gave me they they pretended to try to figure out what was wrong. They gave me epidurals. They did all sorts of things, and but what was really wrong was that all of my nerves had died. The sympathetic nerves, the sensory nerves, the motor nerves, and their sheaths had all died from my thigh down
Wow.
because on the records, which I requested, the tourniquet had only been taken off for the first 2 hours, the second 2 hours, and the third 2 hours. And then the rest of the time it had been left on. So it had been left on for like the last 5 hours. So all those nerves died. So I sent the records off to a lawyer, and they said I had a huge case.
Mm.
And I was talking to them every day, but I also, like, I was getting no sleep. I was screaming from the pain.
Mm.
It was like knives. It was like swords going up through my foot and into my leg. It was really weird pain and very,
Mm.
very specific. And it was what's called phantom pain because my brain thought I
Right.
didn't have a leg anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, the lawyer stopped calling. And then I called a
Mm.
few days later, and they acted like they didn't know me.
Mm.
And then finally, they were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we've got your stuff. We don't see any case here. We don't see any." And
Right.
so I asked for my records back, and my
Mhm.
records had all been altered.
Oh.
And I sent them the original.
Oh.
Um, so I looked for the nurse to get her as a witness, and she was
Mm-hmm.
nowhere to be found anymore.
Whoa. Yeah.
Nowhere. She didn't work at the hospital anymore, nothing. So my family was all saying, "You have to sue the lawyer, you have to sue the doctor, you have to,
Mm.
do all this." The doctors were saying you're never going to walk again because nerves don't regenerate like that. It's like an eighth of an inch a year, and we can't really help you. We can't guarantee the pain will ever stop. And my partner at the time was saying, this is no quality of life for you. Um, let's see what we can try to do to maybe compassionately end your life. And I just said no.
Mm.
I'm perfectly fine.
Mm.
There's nothing wrong with me. And I just kind of denied everybody, and I envisioned myself at that point really strongly
Mm.
out in the garden and with two whole legs. And I just made myself walk
Oh.
by yelling and screaming and making myself walk, by going.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I envisioned myself being well and then I went to sleep and, it magically made
Yeah.
itself well.
Yeah.
I then did a lot of work, and somehow with that focus, I identified what I needed. I worked really hard with some physical therapists. I identified some really good ones. I worked every day, and I had a really good osteopath and I ate a lot of raw eggs, and I grew back my nerves, 3 feet of them, in a year and a half.
Wow. And you were saying doctors were telling you it's about an eighth of an inch a year that they'll grow.
Yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
I did the impossible with that. So
How do you think that happened? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's the thing about, we have to envision something, and I don't know how I knew. I think it was partially that my situations were dire. And when I was having the phantom pain, it was like, how can I still be awake and feeling this? Why haven't I passed out from this
Yeah.
pain? This is
Yeah.
ridiculous. Um, I'm really very tolerant of pain. I'm good with that, but that pain was ridiculous. It was because it wasn't. Phantom pain is kind of not real, because obviously, like for example, even though I was feeling these knives in the bottom of my foot, they weren't there,
Mm. Mm.
but I couldn't stop feeling them. And this is the same thing that war veterans, when they have their legs amputated, that's what they have. That's what they're going through. So that wasn't going to go away. And it's when we have these situations, and we envision what we have to do to help ourselves, because nobody else is helping us. So I think, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I mean, I've been a musician on stage for a while, and now I don't care that much about being on stage.
Mm.
I'm perfectly comfortable on stage. I'm fine, but I don't. I want to help people heal, because I didn't have the help. I didn't have anybody to tell me these things.
No. Yeah.
But if I can tell people how to do this, if I can be that support, um, I want to be able to do that, to really demonstrate how to envision exactly where we not only want to be, but to see that's where we are. And when we see that's where we are, we have to go through all the pain to get there, because it's not going to be any, I mean, without any fear, because it's not going to be any worse than what we're in anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We can't avoid it. We can't sweep it under the rug. It's not going to go away. If we have emotional trauma, it's not going to go away by sweeping it under the rug. It does
Mm-hmm.
not go away. It's gonna
Mm-hmm.
it, it's it comes out in all sorts of misery every day. And I think, anybody listening to this knows that the drinking, the harsh times with partners, the things that happen at work and we don't know why they keep happening to us, and the self-loathing, and the things that we just go through, and eventually the the parts of our body that just go against us because we've kept all of that inside. That's a long, long, torturous road. We're going to go through it no matter what. If we go through it and we see ourselves as being healed, and by being healed, it doesn't mean that we don't revisit these things sometimes,
Right.
but we revisit them, and we can look at these things without beating ourselves up. We look at these things with our sage, you know beautiful, wise person,
Mm.
and know what we've learned from this stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
so it's so important to go through it, because it's the fastest way.
And yet I think, and I know for me, my natural instinct is often to try to avoid the pain, but in fact, by doing that, I'm making it worse.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
we can really work against ourselves. But I want to go back to, you experienced a really traumatic event that wasn't just a one and done. This stretched on over a long period of time, and
Mm,
it would be very easy to get very angry and play the blame game and
mm.
sort of externalize all of that. For me, just listening to the story, like, it makes me angry hearing these things that happened. So how did you navigate and not fall into that blame game?
Right. A fair amount of people have been sort of angry on my behalf, and I think that's it's a good question. I think that I found myself more blameful, um, interestingly enough, when I used to be married, and I'm divorced, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
People separate, and that's actually a good thing, in that
Mm,
we can have a relationship and then grow apart.
yeah.
But while I was at that part, that way of thinking of that, I think that I felt some blame, because I was blamed. And some in the case of my divorce, I think that's the only time I can think of when I felt that, and I called myself out on it, and I've realized that was bringing me more misery, because I was having a lot of financial woes brought up
Mm-hmm.
by that, and
Mm,
sort of blaming the situation and the person, where even though there was some stuff going on that happened because of that, it's not like the person was trying to um, cause a particular branding on me, that would, cause that. And if I were to look at it in retrospect, I can also say almost everybody who has a domestic partner and separates finds that that they have a period of financial upheaval that
Mhm.
is relative to the amount of time that they were together.
Mhm. Mhm.
So as far as other things, my main thing I think with the going backwards with the anesthesiologist,
Mhm.
I felt at first kind of responsible, like that person that person could kill somebody else, being
Mm.
irresponsible, being, I should take care of this. And I feel very much I'm a responsibility type of person, but
Mhm.
apparently, I feel great responsibility, and I don't feel blameful so much when somebody else isn't responsible as much as I feel, I think, disappointed.
Right.
And that's where my personality goes, I guess, is just more toward a disappointment. It's not going to, um, like, my responsibility is my own.
I think that's a really powerful perspective to have, because it's not easy to take responsibility for ourselves. I wouldn't call that the easy path, but I think it is the most meaningful and rewarding path. And is this sense of responsibility, is this something that's always been there for you, or is it developed over time?
I'm an only child to young parents. And so I think that there is a little bit of that is instilled.
Mhm.
I think certain types of people will have a different outlook on life as they have more responsibility placed upon them based on the needs of their family situation at the time, or if family members die and they're left responsible, or that kind of situation might create that. You've made me think about an important concept that I've been exploring a lot. I wrote a book. I'm going to be actually publishing it. I've only
Wow.
self-published it so far, but it's not a huge book, but it's about the cultural pillars
Mhm.
of happiness that have come
Mm.
up through history. So it touches on ikigai and
Mhm.
eudaimonia and hedonism and stoicism, and all the things
Mhm.
that people have looked at and continue to look at to in order to find happiness or just contentment. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the personal responsibility is one of the key tenets of eudaimonia, which is
Right.
the Greek concept of that has to do with the characteristics, or the virtues that people have that give them a personal contentment. And it has to do with when you have personal responsibility and not accepting the responsibility of others, and letting them have their responsibility, and then otherwise
Mm.
uh, having good work and feeling a sense of completion in a good day's work, and having it's I'm trying to think of the way to say it. It's
Mm.
the it's not all, um it sounds kind of serious, but it's actually, if you think about how much more relaxing that is when you don't concern yourself with other people's responsibility, and you do just take care of your own responsibility, and you are actually satisfied with your work, and you feel good about it. It's there are other parts of it too that have to do with eating and resting and the different being what you read and what you how you take care of your body and just all these things that have you be content. But the idea of being actually contented in our responsibility for ourselves is, I thought of this because you mentioned this, and
Mm.
maybe it's one of the things that is actually helped me to be a positive person, because it's something that I've realized of myself, is that I'm kind of insanely positive. you know it doesn't mean that I'm not it doesn't mean that I don't have like depression too. Like this is something that
Mm.
people, I think, sometimes don't realize, that
Yeah.
positive people can be depressed.
Mm.
Depressed people can be positive. um
Mm.
it's it you can people can be smiling and can still have sadness, and there's all these different layers of stuff. So we always want to you can't tell just by looking at somebody what's going on.
Absolutely.
We always want to
Yeah.
be kind to one another.
I mean, we're complex beings, right? And there's so many different layers. And something that I is has become increasingly important to me over time is just trying to lead with empathy, because, like you said, we don't know what people are going through, and to judge it on face value is just it's a bit ridiculous, really.
Yeah,
you know, yeah.
very much. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of taking in what you were saying. Positive people can be depressed too, and there's this juxtaposition. But I think that's part of the beauty and the balance of life. And if we bring that back to pain, the most painful times in my life were probably losing both my parents, both unexpected. One in a freak accident, and one sort of in a was more. It was unexpected, but over a period of 6 months. As painful as they were, and to lose my parents young, 21 and 27, that's how old I was. It's painful, and yes, feelings of anger and blame come up, but I also think there has been so much opportunity and, in a strange way, beauty that has come out of those events. And I'm curious how you feel about that with, the painful events in your life. Do you see any sort of balance to that in your life?
I do. I feel like the highest highs are juxtaposed to the lowest lows.
Right.
And it's just so beautiful to
Mm.
experience that. And even to experience the beauty and pathos of the sadness, the music that comes out of that, the art that comes out of that, the the dance that comes out of that. There's just so much in the world that's beautiful, that comes out of sadness. And there is rebirth, there is renewal. And that's such a high point afterwards.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
there's so much it's like this big cycle, and I don't think we could appreciate it if it was very flat.
Right. How can we enjoy those high moments without the low?
Right.
And how can we actually feel through the pain if we haven't experienced that high? I agree. There's just this balance, and whilst it can feel unfair and it's not easy, I think embracing the fact that some things are out of our control is important. But then realizing what is in our control, because I feel like part of your healing journey is you took into your own hands your healing journey, you know.
Right.
The things that happened leading up to that, a lot of it was out of your control. But then stepping
Right.
forward, you're like, right, I'm not going to get caught up in that. There's still feelings to process there, but actually going, right, what can I control? And you were just, it sounds like you had so much determination and grit to get through that, and this amazing positivity, which I think is powerful. And another thing I want to raise is that healing is this ongoing journey. I feel like
Yeah.
it's not, you don't just heal and it's done, on to the next thing. um,
No.
it is ongoing. And I think, the pain does stay with us. It's different and it changes,
Right.
but it's still with us. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. I think that we have it can be it's almost like a painting that's changed color.
Mm, mm. I love that. Yeah.
But I'm just thinking, there are things that happened in between for me that I'm not mentioning. After my car accident, before my surgery, when I was still um, getting out the last, it wasn't the last, but more of what I was feeling about my whole growing up. And I would go and movies really affected me a lot. And it wouldn't matter what kind of movie it was, really. I
Mm,
mean, just even I would be processing the world in the movies, and I would come out of the movie and just have to walk around on the sidewalks for a long time and just cry and just talk about all of the injustices and all of the things that
mhm.
all of the people who weren't being seen and were
Right.
hurting, all of the animals that weren't being seen and were hurting, all of the injustices. And sometimes I would just beat the sidewalks. Literally, I would beat my fists on the sidewalks. I
Oh.
don't beat my fists on the sidewalks anymore, but there was a time when I did that.
Mhm.
And and we have those we have those times of processing. And
Mhm.
so it's like the picture was a different color then, but
Mm.
I'm I'm glad for that.
Mhm.
I I got into a group then. It was probably the best thing that happened, because I had a sort of a mandatory therapist at first, and that did almost nothing for me.
Mm.
But I got into a group after, and it was full of just people from all walks of life, and we had a punching bag in there, and we also had just pillows, and we got to do a lot of punching things,
Mhm.
and talking to each other. And some of those women were actively sex workers.
Mhm.
They were so meek and non-verbal in the group, but they
Right.
could punch things
Mm.
and kick things, and it was so important,
Mm.
you know. that group was really cathartic.
Mm.
It was good. I love being I love now just listening to people,
Mm. Mm.
witnessing them.
Can you tell us a bit more about some of the work you do in that space? Because you do coaching, and I know you do a weekly telecast called The Joyful Path. And I'd love to hear a bit more about what it's all about and why you do the work you do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Joyful Path is the name of my new business.
Mm-hmm.
I've been I've been a coach in my performing business, coaching performers for a while, but now
Mm-hmm.
I coach anyone, and it's all a journey on the joyful path, because it's a joyful path to healing.
Mm.
So what that is that um, the joy is on the other side, and the joy is through whatever it is that I've found that I'm really good at helping people remove barriers. The
Mm.
barriers are, our own self-sabotaging to taking away our own pain. So the things that are in the way of us taking away our own pain are the stories. The stories, like, like doctors saying we can't heal, or people saying that we should do this or we shouldn't do that. I mean, we are each a big conglomeration of all the stories we've been told since we were born, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so those things are, some of them are helpful and a lot of them are barriers.
Right.
So that's a lot of what I do. My
Yeah.
Tuesday telecast on the Joyful Path is um, less telling anybody what to do and more like what you do, talking to people from all sorts of different places who've either been recommended to me because they are on a joyful path themselves, or
Mm-hmm.
they have already lifted themselves to the joyful path, and from that place they are lifting others to the joyful path. Because what I something that I'm fond of saying is that when we lift ourselves, the community or the world follows and in turn lifts us back.
Mm.
It's a little bit different than what I think a lot of people think of. They think lift others and then we'll get
Yeah.
lifted back. But we have to lift ourselves first, and then others will
I
follow
agree.
and lift us back.
Yeah. And for some reason, we find it so hard to lift ourselves. It's like, it's so difficult and unnatural to put ourselves first, but
Right,
actually, great things happen when we do that, not just for ourselves, but like you say, those
right,
around us in the community. And I think the
right.
world is such a better place when we do that. So I think the work you're doing is incredibly important.
It's kind of funny how you when we don't do it, how much we will end up looking strangely like we're selfish, or like we're a mess, or like we're broken, or
Mm,
when we don't work on ourselves, lift ourselves, when
right,
we're just only lifting others, it looks like we want something, or we
right.
it actually, we need to help ourselves.
We do. Yeah, yeah. And to tie this off, can you describe for me What is the joyful path? If you had to distill that into a description, what does the joyful path mean to you?
Yeah, the joyful path is a place that is in our hearts, in our minds. It's really got to start with listening to our heart and not to the reactions in our brains. Just
Mm,
really being felt in our hearts. What do we want? And are we there? Are we going there? Are we contented? Are we happy? Are we healed? Are we going toward being healed?
mm-hmm,
And do we feel confident in getting there?
mm.
Do we feel supported in getting there? Do we feel free?
Yeah, I love that. It creates such a strong visual. And you mentioned free, and that's a concept I'm always thinking about. You know, this podcast is all about finding your freedom, and I think it looks different for everybody. And I think it very much ties into to your concept of the joyful path. I just want to say thank you so much for the amazing conversation today and just your raw honesty. It was amazing hearing your story and some of the struggles, but also the amazing things that have come out of that pain for you. Here's to listening to our hearts and finding our way on the joyful path. Let's start moving in that direction. Thank you so much, Lydia, for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Rosie. This has been a pleasure.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. If this episode resonated with you at all, could I please ask that you share it with a friend who you think could get value from it? And whilst you're doing that, make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss another episode. And whilst you're following or subscribing, please leave us a rating, preferably 5 stars, and also a written review. Doing each of these things is going to help this podcast reach more people and impact more lives, which is, at the end of the day, is what we're here to do. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Remember, you matter, you're worth it, and you are so, so capable. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next week.